Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Pediatric Speech Sister Show. I am your host, Melanie White Evans, and welcome back. If you are new here, please be sure to like, share, subscribe, send this to your other speech friends. On this channel, I like to talk about all things cultural responsiveness, interpersonal and interprofessional collaboration with people from diverse cultures, and so much more. If you've been following me on the Pediatric Speech Sister Instagram page, I just got back from Belize. I am currently wearing my Beyond the Label t-shirt. Everybody, Beyond the Label is an extension of Jada's Got Your Backpack. If you don't know Jada, she is a great friend of mine from graduate school, and she already had this nonprofit in graduate school where she would give backpacks to children in Belize. There's a great shortage on school supplies there. She's actually Belizean American. Her parents immigrated to the United States from Belize, so that is home. So now fast forward about 5 or 6 years, she created Beyond the Label, which is a virtual speech therapy service for children in Belize, mainly with autism, Down syndrome, mixed receptive and expressive language disorders secondary to those genetic syndromes. One thing that is important to know about overall Caribbean and African cultures is that there is a strong stigma to having a child with disabilities. A lot of times people really blame the parents, or they believe that it is a curse to have a child with a disability. So another thing to recognize about Belize specifically, and this was just after myself inquiring with the leads out there is no formal speech therapy program. There's no speech therapy graduate program. People, they actually outsource to other countries. So you might have heard of other programs like Therapy Abroad and Therapy Travelers. I chose Beyond the Label because, first of all, it's Black owned and it's owned by a woman whose family is from Belize, and it's very personal to her. And she definitely did her part to make sure that the therapists are supported. This is a program for speech pathologists and occupational therapists to volunteer their time and their clinical skills once a week to support a child in Belize. So we just got back from our trip, and the day that we had the screening day was especially rewarding for me. I had 13 screeners that day. So I had a lot of screeners that day, learned a lot about myself as a clinician. Mind you, I took a hiatus from doing direct speech therapy and wanted to dive completely in on my consulting passion and broadcasting passion. And so it was really such an honor that Jada even invited me to fly out to Belize and do these screeners for them and for the school districts out there in Coruscant, Belize. And if you're familiar with Coruscant is a part of Belize where they speak Spanish and English and patois. Beautiful language structures out there and a beautiful culture. I really enjoyed myself. And when I went to do those screeners, I noticed a lot about the culture and the language. And I was also mindful about my own culture and how I was presenting. I think a lot of times, at least from my own experience, I come in with my American privilege. And so I have to, even myself, I have to check my ethnocentrism and make sure I'm not going in trying to save them, but to help them. There's a big difference that we'll talk about on other episodes. And for the purposes of this episode, I want to talk about some things I've learned and some things that maybe you can take into your own practices when working with Caribbean cultures or just working with multicultural cultures in general. If you have the opportunity to fly out to different countries to do speech and language therapy, and if you just so decide to work with Beyond the Label, I will go ahead and put a link to contact the founder directly. Again, she is looking for speech therapists and occupational therapists especially. So let's get into some things I've learned. So the first thing I learned was to always communicate. I think that, of course, as communication specialists, you might be like, of course we're communicating. That's just what we do. When I say always communicate, I mean make sure that you are communicating the process to the parent. Of course, it is a screener, so you don't expect the screener to go too long. A lot of times it's essentially a checklist. Yes, no, can they do this? Did they do this? These particular screeners were almost like evaluations where the questions were a little bit more in depth and really got them to label objects and such. There were different parts to the screener that targeted the children or evaluated the children's ability to answer questions, to label verbally, to label by pointing. I would test their receptive communication skills. I would test their expressive communication skills. I would test their pragmatic skills. Did they say hello to me? Were they able to listen? Were they attentive? Things of that nature. And if you are not familiar with education, if you're not familiar with even what teachers do, and even if you are as a caregiver and someone who is responsible for this child, you might be sitting there kind of confused. So I really wanted to make sure I was intentional in communicating with the parents. Hello, are you the caregiver? Great. I always ask, what's your relationship to the child? I said, okay, well, great. I am Melanie. I will be doing the screeners for today. And I even asked the parent, what were your concerns? What had you sign up for the screener? That was especially important because that was my way of really just building rapport with the parent. That was my way of building rapport with the families to let them know I am here to help you. I'm here to hear your concern. And I am here to let you know if your child should or should not get further therapy services with Beyond the Label. And I noticed that once I opened that door to the parent, they started connecting with me on a more genuine level rather than myself being higher on a hierarchy, So essentially, by communicating with the parent, you're fostering a relationship that doesn't feel like there's a power dynamic that's off balance. So by communicating with the parent, I realized that I shifted a power dynamic and the parent was able to communicate with me as someone who can help them rather than just as someone who just knew so much more than this parent. Another thing I want to communicate is by communicating with this parent, keeping them part of the process throughout the whole screening session, I allowed them to have power and I allowed them to know that they are the experts in their family. They are the language expert. I am someone who is coming from the United States and going into their environment. So I needed their help. And it became a team effort in a lot of ways. So always, always, always communicate. Another thing I recognized while I was there was to not be afraid to flex my counseling muscles. When I have a parent who I'm aware has some sort of trauma, or parents who I can tell felt guilty and almost felt like they don't know what else to do, almost helpless, that's when I came in, of course, staying within my scope of practice, but I came in and made sure I leveled with the parent, used my empathetic skills, my empathic skills, and told the parent, hey, you are here now. Do not blame yourself for what's going on with your child. You're doing everything you can, and this is just the next step. I'm telling you, that really makes the difference. And it's another great way to build rapport with the parent. We really want the parents to walk out of the screener smiling, or at least with some sort of sense of hope, not feeling hopeless. A third thing that I recognized and that I highly recommend to anyone else who is treating people from Caribbean cultures or going overseas is to recognize that there are stigmas to having disabilities, especially if it's presented, if it's clear that the child is neurodivergent in any way. This could really cause heartache to the community. There are parents who feel like their children are cursed. And I will even say this, that doctors are nervous to even give a diagnosis or send out any concerns particularly for autism because of the stigma in that community. And this parent came to me with her child who I am a speech pathologist. I cannot legally say that someone does or does not have autism, but as someone who has treated a lot of children with autism, I know the characteristics. This child presented with a lot of the characteristics of somebody who has autism. And so what this parent told me was that the pediatrician essentially shooed them away, told them that there was nothing to worry about, that these behaviors were normal for a child their age or typical for a child their age, when frankly, it was not. The child was not talking and the child was 2 years old. By 2 years old, should at least be putting two-word phrases together. Essentially, what I did was I completed the screener and I told the parent that I will communicate with the leads and we will contact them and let them know if further evaluation would be done. But I pretty much assured the parent, yes, further evaluation will need to be done. Next time I go out of the country, I will make sure that I have language development milestones or some sort of paperwork to give the parent so that way they can have that as a carryover and they're not leaving with just verbal instructions, but something that they can have tangible in their hand. And even if they went back to the pediatrician, they would have that in their hand. Hey, look, this is what the typical language milestones are. My child is not doing this. And so in that way, I can help the parent advocate. Another thing that I could have done during those screeners is inquire about additional resources before the screener started. So that way I already had my mental script or maybe even a written script if that's your thing or if it was too many resources. But I would have at least had in my mind exactly where I can point this parent. Now, mind you, again, I am an outsider coming in and thank God that the leads were there so I can always ask them where they could go. But there is something about, I just put myself in the parent's shoes. And even though they were completely understanding and kind, then you're dealing with a lot of the overwhelm of a child who has behavioral difficulties and a woman who is not from this country. And on top of that, she could be saying a lot of jargon that you may or may not understand. And on top of that, you're communicating certain issues that you don't exactly know what to do. And then I'm asking somebody else where the resources are. Personally, I would understand the situation. I would give it the benefit of the doubt. But wouldn't it be so much better and a bit easier on the stomach if the professional who you were directly working with knew where to find the resources? So that way you knew that you were in good hands. That is one thing that I will do the next time I get to make it to Belize or another foreign country where I get to provide speech and language services and screeners, is make sure that I have the tools or the resources where I can refer them. And so speaking of referrals, know when to refer. I'll give you a great example. I had one child who, 6 years old, only said one word, but their receptive skills were strong. They were stronger in their receptive skills than they were in their expressive skills. And so when it came time to get to the receptive part of the screener and demonstrating their understanding of spatial concepts like on and off and in and out, next to the child, brilliant. He was between two. He was between next to and under. He was in between and was trying to decide. So really, when children do that, that tells me that they do know it, but they're doubting themselves and their ability to answer correctly. Adults do the same thing, right? Well, this child has low self-esteem, and that's when he shut down. Well, it was after this point when the child shut down and was not willing to participate with the rest of the screener. I would ask him to perform a certain task, and he was not willing to do it. And so the parents expressed to me that this is what they said. This is what he does. At school, he does this. At home, he does this. If a parent or if his favorite teacher leaves for the day or is out for the day, he's crying the whole day. And this is what I knew to refer. I said, okay, get him in contact with a psychologist because he is definitely showing some attachment issues. And it would be our job to work with the psychologist and make this a team effort. And then that's when I reached out to the leads. Hi, do you have any psychologists or behavioral therapists who can help this child? So know when to refer if you are a new speech language pathologist going out of the country. And even if you're working in your respective country watching this, know which different professions work with which different set of symptoms. Understand our scope of practice. Understanding our scope of practice will really get us out of trouble. It will make sure that we are really helping the family rather than doing things that really is not our job or within our training to do. Even counseling can be a slippery slope, but again, that's why I recommend going to the ASHA scope of practice. So another thing that I did was not being afraid to confirm cultural norms. And that's something I definitely recommend if you are working with multicultural families and groups. For example, the screener had figurative language prompts and vocabulary. And firstly, this was my first time in Belize. And even though they spoke English, there may be certain phrases that they just simply don't say. And so I didn't feel comfortable counting that as right or wrong. And I, again, communicating with the parent, keeping them an active participant in the process, ask them, is this something that you normally say? They'll tell me yes or no, which a lot of the times I actually did say yes. But again, you never know. It's better to be on the safe side when it comes to our cultural competence. Another thing I did was I asked the child, do you know baseball? I know baseball is known worldwide across the country, but again, better safe than sorry. Ask. The final thing I will say is to get curious about speech patterns. So in Belize and Corozal, again, it's a mixture of English, Spanish, and Patois. The mother is telling me certain patterns and speech patterns that her child has. And she's like, yeah, he always does this. He calls his grandma ta, for example. And I noticed with other examples that she would give me, I started noticing a pattern. And I said, what is your grandma's name supposed to be? Or what is he supposed to be calling his grandmother? And she said, her name is Mamita. And he calls her ta. And I said, okay. So that told me a lot about his speech problems or things that we would be working on in speech therapy. He demonstrated a lot of syllable reduction there. So that is the episode, everybody. Overall, Belize was fabulous. I highly recommend going there. The people of Belize are so kind and hospitable. And Jada from Jada's Got Your Backpack really showed the therapists a great time. If you are interested in joining the Jada's Got Your Backpack team, please be sure to check out the link in the description notes so that way you can reach out to Jada herself. Check out the program yourself. I highly recommend it, everybody. Until then, I'll see you in the next episode.